May 8, 1945, Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. The morning sun filters through the Georgia pines, casting dappled shadows across the gravel path where 23 young German women walk in uncertain formation toward the processing station. Their Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms, once crisp and purposeful, now hang loose and travel-stained after weeks of captivity. Among them, Greta Hoffmann, a 20-year-old radio operator from the 12th Luftwaffe Communications Unit, clutches a small leather satchel containing her identification papers and a photograph of her family's farmhouse near Dresden. The sound that stops her mid-step is not the bark of American guards or the clang of prison gates, but something far more incomprehensible: the deep rumble of a military truck engine, accompanied by a distinctly feminine voice calling out maintenance. Instructions in confident, unaccented English. She turns toward the motor pool and sees something that violates every principle of order and propriety she has been taught since childhood. Behind the wheel of a massive GMC truck sits an American woman in military uniform, her sleeves rolled, up to reveal tanned forearms as she maneuvers the 6-ton vehicle with casual expertise. Another woman, equally uniformed and equally competent, emerges from beneath the hood of a Sherman tank, wiping grease from her hands with a confidence that speaks of genuine mechanical knowledge. The cognitive dissonance is immediate and overwhelming. In Nazi Germany, such scenes would have been impossible, unthinkable, a violation of natural order that the Reich had spent 12 years carefully constructing and maintaining. This moment of profound cultural collision represents more than simple surprise at role reversal. It embodies the shattering of an entire worldview built on rigid gender hierarchies and racial superiority. These young German women, raised in a society that proclaimed female submission as biological destiny and German cultural supremacy as historical inevitability, now confront evidence that contradicts both fundamental assumptions simultaneously. The women they observe are not only performing tasks forbidden to German women, but doing so with a competence that suggests systematic training, institutional support, and social acceptance of female capability in realms the Third Reich had declared forever masculine. The statistical reality of American women's wartime service would have seemed fantastic to any German observer educated in Nazi ideology. By 1945, over 350,000 American women served in uniform across all branches of the military, with tens of thousands more working in defense plants, driving trucks, repairing aircraft, and performing virtually every non-combat role traditionally reserved for men. The Women's Army Corps alone numbered 150,000 members, while the Navy's WAVES program had enlisted 100,000 women, and the Coast Guard's SPARS added another 13,000. These numbers represented not token participation or wartime desperation, but a systematic mobilization of female capability that American society had not only accepted, but celebrated. Greta's own background illuminates the stark contrast between German and American approaches to women's roles in wartime. As a Wehrmacht-Helferin, she had been permitted to serve only in carefully circumscribed auxiliary functions: radio operation, clerical work, telephone switching, roles that supported military operations without challenging traditional gender boundaries. Her training had emphasized that women's service was temporary, exceptional, and subordinate to their primary biological function as mothers of future German soldiers. The Nazi ideology that shaped her worldview proclaimed that women's involvement in traditionally masculine spheres represented cultural decay, a symptom of the democratic decadence that supposedly weakened enemy nations. Yet here, in an American military installation, she witnessed systematic evidence of female competence in roles that Nazi doctrine insisted would emasculate society and weaken military effectiveness. The women driving trucks and repairing tanks moved with purpose and authority, their presence clearly accepted by male colleagues who worked alongside them without apparent resentment or disruption of military discipline. This was not the chaos and social breakdown that Nazi propaganda had predicted would result from abandoning traditional gender roles, but rather the smooth functioning of a military machine that had successfully integrated female capabilities into its operational structure. The sight of American women in military roles challenged more than gender assumptions. It struck at the heart of Nazi racial ideology. These women, many of them from diverse ethnic backgrounds that Nazi theory classified as racially inferior, demonstrated capabilities that contradicted fundamental assumptions about genetic superiority. A second-generation Italian-American woman adjusting carburetors with evident expertise, an Irish-American truck driver navigating complex routes with professional competence, a Polish-American radio operator managing multiple communication channels. Simultaneously, each represented living refutation of the racial hierarchies that had justified 12 years of German aggression and genocide. The psychological impact on German female prisoners was immediate and profound. Ilse Weber, a 24-year-old nurse from Bavaria who had served with Army Group Center on the Eastern Front, would later recall the moment she first saw American women operating heavy machinery. Everything we had been taught about the weakness of democratic societies, about the natural order of things, about what women could and could not do, it all crumbled in that instant. These women were not masculine or unfeminine as we had been told such behavior would make them. They were competent, confident, and completely at ease in roles we had been taught were impossible for our sex. The observations extended beyond individual competence to institutional support systems that revealed fundamental differences in how the two societies valued female contribution. American women in military service received the same training as men in their specialties, used the same equipment, followed the same protocols, and earned comparable respect from their superiors and peers. This was not the grudging acceptance of female help in desperate circumstances, but the systematic integration of women into military operations based on ability rather than gender. For German women who had internalized Nazi teachings about female biological limitations, the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. They witnessed American women not merely performing masculine tasks, but excelling at them, innovating within them, and teaching them to others. A WWII mechanic explaining engine repair to a male colleague. A Waves radio operator training new personnel in communication protocols. A WASP pilot sharing flight techniques with military aviators. Each interaction demonstrated that American society had not merely permitted women to enter traditionally masculine spheres, but had empowered them to become experts within those spheres. The symbolic power of the American military truck became a recurring presence in the memories of German female prisoners. Unlike German vehicles, which were increasingly scarce and poorly maintained by 1945, American trucks appeared in endless supply, modern and well-maintained, driven by women who handled them with professional competence. The trucks represented not just mechanical transportation, but the industrial capacity of a society that could afford to assign valuable equipment to female operators, confident in their ability to use it effectively. Greta began to understand that what she witnessed was not an aberration or desperate wartime measure, but the expression of fundamentally different assumptions about human potential and social organization. American society had not weakened itself by expanding women's roles, but had strengthened itself by utilizing previously untapped capabilities. The efficiency and effectiveness of American military operations, which had contributed to Germany's defeat, were enhanced rather than hindered by female participation. This realization forced a complete re-evaluation of Nazi ideology's core assumptions. If women could successfully perform roles that Nazi doctrine insisted were biologically impossible, what other Nazi teachings might be equally false? If racially inferior Americans could demonstrate capabilities that contradicted genetic theories of superiority, what validity remained in the racial hierarchies that had justified German aggression? The evidence before their eyes suggested that Nazi ideology had not merely been politically or morally wrong, but factually incorrect about fundamental questions of human capability and social organization. The psychological transformation was not immediate or complete. Years of indoctrination could not be overcome by single observations, however dramatic. But the seeds of doubt, once planted, began to grow as German female prisoners observed American women day after day, performing competently in roles that Nazi ideology had declared impossible. The consistency of the evidence, the obvious normalcy of female participation in military operations, and the clear effectiveness of integrated units gradually eroded certainty in teachings that had once seemed unquestionable. Martha Schneider, a communications specialist from Hamburg who had coordinated anti-aircraft defenses, found herself studying American women with growing fascination. "At first I thought it must be propaganda, some elaborate deception designed to confuse us," she would later recall. "But you cannot fake competence, cannot stage expertise. These women knew what they were doing, and the men around them respected that knowledge. It was impossible to dismiss as weakness or desperation." The transformation of perception extended beyond individual capability to broader questions of social organization and values. German female prisoners began to understand that American society's approach to gender roles reflected deeper philosophical differences about human dignity, individual potential, and social responsibility. Rather than restricting women to predetermined roles based on biological function, American society had created opportunities for women to discover and develop their individual capabilities, contributing to collective success in ways that Nazi ideology had declared impossible. The truck continued to appear in their daily experiences, delivering supplies, transporting personnel, maintaining the smooth operation of military life. Each time, it served as a reminder that effectiveness and competence could transcend traditional boundaries, that societies might grow stronger, rather than weaker, by expanding opportunities for all citizens to contribute according to their abilities rather than their assigned social categories. As 1945 progressed and the reality of Germany's defeat became undeniable, German female prisoners faced a choice between clinging to discredited ideologies or accepting evidence that contradicted everything they had been taught. For many, the daily observation of American women's competence in military roles became a catalyst for broader intellectual and moral transformation. They began to question not just Nazi teachings about gender, but Nazi teachings about race, democracy, and human nature itself. The process was painful and disorienting, abandoning beliefs that had shaped identity and worldview required, confronting the possibility that they had been complicit in a system built on falsehoods. But for those who found the courage to accept contradictory evidence, the American women they observed represented more than military efficiency. They embodied alternative possibilities for human organization, social values, and individual potential that offered hope for different futures built on different foundations. When repatriation finally came in 1946, many German female prisoners returned home carrying more than memories of American abundance or military defeat. They carried new understandings of human capability that would influence their participation in Germany's post-war reconstruction. Some became advocates for women's rights in the emerging democratic Germany, drawing on their observations of American women's wartime service. Others channeled their transformed understanding into education, social work, and political activism that helped build a more inclusive and democratic German society. The symbolic power of the American military truck would endure in their memories, not as a weapon of war, but as an instrument of revelation, a mobile challenge to assumptions they had never thought to question. The women who drove those trucks with such competence had demonstrated that strength could take many forms, that capability could transcend traditional boundaries, and that societies could grow more powerful by expanding rather than restricting opportunities for human contribution. Epilogue. In the decades that followed, as the Cold War drew new lines across the map of Europe and competing ideologies again claimed universal truth, the lessons learned in American prison camps took on renewed significance. The question of women's roles in society continued to evolve, shaped by changing economic needs, social movements, and philosophical developments that built upon wartime transformations. But for those German women who had witnessed American female capability firsthand, the memory of competence behind the wheel of a military truck served as permanent reminder that human potential could not be contained by traditional categories. That effectiveness mattered more than convention, and that societies willing to embrace expanded definitions of capability often discovered previously untapped sources of strength. The truck had carried more than supplies and personnel. It had transported new possibilities for understanding human dignity, social organization, and individual potential. In that simple act of competent driving, American women had demonstrated that freedom and effectiveness were not contradictory forces, but complementary ones, each reinforcing the other in an endless cycle of human possibility. And in that demonstration, perhaps, lay the most profound lesson of all, that the measure of any society's strength is not found in the rigidity of its social boundaries, but in its willingness to discover and develop the full range of human capabilities, regardless of the traditional categories that might seem to constrain them. The me engine sound that had first stopped Greta Hoffmann in her tracks would echo through history as a symbol of transformation, not just of war and defeat, but of the possibility that human beings could learn from evidence, could change their understanding when confronted with new realities, and could build better societies based on broader and more generous assumptions about what people could achieve when given the opportunity to try.